What's the best way to mental gymnastics your way out of a bad mood? Here's what one study found. It doesn't matter how you do it, but at the same time, not all techniques are created equal. This episode is based on this research paper by Rachel Rani and colleagues. Emotion regulation research looks at all the different ways we can influence and modify our emotions. Cognitive reappraisal is one of these techniques that focuses on reinterpreting a situation to reduce its emotional impact. Past studies have shown that training people to reinterpret or reappraise their situations can lead to better mental health. A distinction we're going to make now is between well-being and ill-being. Well-being is the set of positive emotions we have. We'll want to maximize this. Ill-being is what contributes to negative emotions, and we'll want to reduce this. Both are correlated and work together, but are slightly different processes. This study focuses on 3 specific reappraisal techniques. Positive reframing is all about recognizing potential positives in a situation, like trying to see what lessons we can learn from it. Temporal distancing is about giving yourself distance between you and the problem, like asking how you would feel about a certain event 10 years from now. Self-distancing is similar, but now you distance yourself by taking an outsider view on things, like taking a fly-on-the-wall perspective. So what can make these 3 techniques different? Aren't they all cognitive reappraisal strategies? Well, first, the unfamiliarity effect. A technique might seem better because people simply know about it. The authors use phrases like "think on the bright side" and "this too shall pass" to show that positive reframing and temporal distancing are concepts people might already recognize. This familiarity could make them easier to practice and more likely to be used than self-distancing. Second, the techniques require different levels of perspective shift. Positive reframing involves no shift in your perspective, just focusing on the missed positives. Temporal distancing asks you to imagine your future self, while self-distancing asks you to view yourself as an outsider. These shifts can be harder for people to use, but might offer a fresh perspective that's more beneficial for mental health in the long run. Lastly, these techniques might target different outcomes, well-being or ill-being. Positive reframing boosts well-being by asking explicitly to focus on the positives, while temporal and self-distancing might instead reduce ill-being by distancing you from negative emotions. It seems subtle, but this distinction matters when designing interventions, as some situations may require prioritizing one over the other. These authors had 2 questions they wanted to answer. Firstly, can training people to use one of these techniques improve well-being and reduce ill-being? And secondly, they wanted to know if global reappraisal is the cognitive mechanism behind these changes. Global reappraisal is a participant's tendency to use any reappraisal techniques, including ones not taught by the intervention. The training was completed online. People were asked to identify potential stressful events that might happen over the next 2 weeks and create written plans on how they would use their respective techniques in those situations. Once all 204 people were tested, here's what they found. As expected, any intervention is better than no intervention. Interestingly, reappraisal training, regardless of the specific technique learned, made people more likely to use positive reframing and temporal distancing. This suggests that you don't need to worry about what technique to train people on, but I'm not sure why people can magically gain reframing and temporal distancing skills. Self-distancing was the exception to this, with increased usage only in the group trained to use it. The authors attribute this to the familiarity problem. Self-distancing requires explicit instructions since it's less well known, although I'm not entirely convinced this applies to everyone, and I'll explain why in a bit. The authors also found that global reappraisal only mediates the link between interventions and well-being, not ill-being. This suggests the existence of another cognitive mechanism affected by these interventions that specifically go on to reduce ill-being in particular. My issue with this is that global reappraisal was measured with one questionnaire, which doesn't seem to be used a lot in the literature. I'm not even sure if global reappraisal is an agreed upon cognitive mechanism. This raises questions about whether the questionnaire accurately measures global reappraisal, if it does exist. Although I could be wrong and the ERQ might actually be widely recognized, so please correct me if that's the case. So how does this research advance our understanding of emotion regulation? Firstly, it's another piece of evidence showing how an online single-session intervention can be enough to produce detectable changes. Second, assuming the questionnaire is valid, the study proposes global reappraisal to be a shared mechanism behind these reappraisal interventions. Knowing why interventions cause changes might help develop additional interventions that can target these specific mechanisms. However, the study didn't measure long-term effectiveness. It only tracked participants for 2 weeks. Over time, it's possible that the effort required for perspective shifts might outweigh the perceived benefits in the long term, making people ultimately use it less. There's also a question of generalizability. This study used native English speakers in the US, where certain phrases or strategies might be more familiar. In cultures where phrases like "this too shall pass" don't exist, or where emotional suppression is the social norm, will cognitive reappraisal training resonate equally well? Additionally, cognitive reappraisal isn't always ideal for mental health. This other study summarizes individual and situation factors that might actually make reappraisal harmful. For example, a person having poor distancing skills or a situation being highly emotional can make reappraisal do more harm than good. Finally, the sample was non-clinical, so we can't assume similar effects for people with clinical depression or anxiety. This study, for example, suggests that reappraisal ability doesn't correlate with lower depression or anxiety scores, suggesting that knowing reappraisal alone won't help with depression or anxiety-related distress. Ultimately, emotion regulation and well-being are complex, and no single intervention can address all variables. Factors like individual traits, situational context, and clinical symptoms can significantly influence the effectiveness of any form of mental health intervention. And that's the study. What do you think? Are you convinced by these findings, or do you see things differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions you might have. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.